What is this?
There are certain performers who exist in a category entirely their own. People who walk into a room and somehow shift the entire atmosphere without saying a single word. People whose mere presence makes you sit up a little straighter, lean in a little closer, and wonder, what is this person going to do next? Anne Hathaway is exactly that kind of person. She has spent more than 2 decades in Hollywood collecting accolades, breaking box office records, and delivering performances that stay with audiences long after the credits roll. She won an Academy Award. She transformed herself into one of the most iconic villains in fashion history. She donned a catsuit and convinced an entire generation that she was the definitive Catwoman. By almost every conventional measure of success, Anne Hathaway has already reached the summit. But here is the thing about Anne Hathaway that her filmography alone cannot fully capture. Behind every serious role, every red carpet moment, every carefully crafted interview answer, there is a woman who is genuinely, deeply, almost recklessly funny. And not funny in the polished, rehearsed way that publicists approve and talk show producers plan in advance. Funny in the way that catches you completely off guard. Funny in the way that makes you wonder whether you are watching a prepared performance or simply witnessing someone who cannot help themselves. The laughter that Anne Hathaway generates is the most honest kind. It sneaks up on you, grabs you by the collar, and refuses to let go until your sides ache and your eyes are watering. This is the story of how Anne Hathaway made the whole world laugh. Not once, not twice, but again and again, across decades, across continents, across every format imaginable. From late-night television to live stage performances to red carpet encounters to something as simple and unexpected as a children's playground slide. This is the story of a woman who could have coasted on her talent and her beauty and her Oscars, but instead chose to be something far more interesting, completely, wonderfully, hilariously unpredictable. To understand why Anne Hathaway's humor lands so powerfully, you have to understand where she came from as a performer. She did not arrive in Hollywood as a comedian. She arrived as a dramatic actress with serious theatrical training and an ambition that was impossible to ignore. Her early roles leaned heavily into sweetness and sincerity, the awkward princess discovering her royal heritage, the young woman navigating impossible romantic choices, the girl next door with a warm smile and a generous heart. These roles were enormously successful, but they also created a public perception of Anne Hathaway that was, in some ways, almost too polished, too earnest, too perfect. What the world did not yet fully understand was that beneath all of that careful, composed professionalism was someone who had grown up deeply in love with comedy. Anne Hathaway had studied comedic timing the same way she had studied dramatic technique, seriously, methodically, with tremendous respect for the craft. She understood that comedy was not simply the opposite of drama. She understood that the greatest comedy often came from the same emotional truth as the greatest drama. And she understood, perhaps more importantly than anything else, that the most powerful tool a comedian has is the element of surprise. The moment when the audience thinks they know exactly what is coming next, and then something else entirely happens instead. This philosophy would define some of the most memorable comedic moments of her career. And it started, in a very particular way, on a Saturday night in New York City in the year 2012. Saturday Night Live has a long and complicated history with celebrity hosts. Some hosts arrive, deliver their monologue, play their assigned roles in pre-written sketches, and leave having done exactly what was expected of them. They are competent. They are professional. They are also, more often than not, immediately forgettable. Then there is the rarer, more electrifying category of host, the ones who seem to take the assignment as a personal challenge. The ones who throw themselves so completely into every sketch, every character, every physical bit, that the audience forgets they are watching someone pretending and simply starts watching someone be. Anne Hathaway had already hosted Saturday Night Live twice before her 2012 appearance, so she was not walking into unfamiliar territory. But familiarity, for someone like Anne Hathaway, has never been an excuse for playing it safe. On that third hosting appearance, she made a choice that delighted the audience and demonstrated, in the clearest possible terms, exactly what kind of performer she truly was. She chose to do a celebrity impression. Not just any celebrity impression, an impression of Katie Holmes, delivered in the context of a parody of The Ellen DeGeneres Show. Now, celebrity impressions are a staple of Saturday Night Live, but they are also one of the most unforgiving formats in all of live performance. A bad impression is immediately, painfully obvious. There is nowhere to hide when you have told an audience exactly who you are supposed to be and then fail to convince them. But a great impression, one where the physicality is right and the vocal quality is right and the emotional truth behind the character is right, a great impression can make an audience feel like they are experiencing something genuinely magical. Anne Hathaway's Katie Holmes was that kind of impression. The posture, the timing, the specific quality of strained cheerfulness that Holmes had been projecting publicly during a particularly turbulent period in her personal life. Hathaway captured all of it with a precision and a compassion that made the audience laugh not at Katie Holmes but somehow with her. It was a remarkable achievement, and it served notice to anyone who had not already figured it out, and Hathaway was funnier than you thought. But Saturday Night Live, for all its prestige, is a controlled environment. It is a show built around comedy. The writers are funny people. The cast is full of funny people. When you host Saturday Night Live, you are swimming in funny water, and it is relatively easy to stay afloat because everything around you is holding you up. The moments that truly reveal a comedian's instincts are the unscripted ones. The moments that happen in real conversations, at real parties, in real interviews, when there is no script and no safety net and no one to save you if the joke falls flat. Anne Hathaway has had many such moments. One of the most telling happened not on a stage or a television set, but at an ordinary social gathering, the kind of cocktail party that fills the calendar of anyone who works in the entertainment industry. She was standing near the bar, holding a drink, doing the thing you do at those parties where you scan the room and try to figure out whether anyone you know is nearby, when she caught the eye of Daniel Craig from across the room. Daniel Craig, James Bond himself, one of the most recognizably cool human beings on the planet, appeared to be looking directly at her and appeared to be saying something. The words were unclear over the noise of the party, but his expression suggested he was being deliberately provocative, in the playful way that people who know each other well sometimes are. And Hathaway, operating entirely on instinct and a possibly unwise quantity of social confidence, responded in kind. She matched his energy. She fired back. She said exactly the kind of thing you say to a friend who is teasing you, which would have been completely appropriate, except for the fact that Daniel Craig was not actually talking to her. He was talking to the person standing directly behind her, the director Stephen Daldry, who was apparently engaged in some spectacularly inappropriate behavior that had prompted James Bond to intervene verbally. The realization landed on Anne Hathaway with the full force of profound, unavoidable embarrassment. She and Daniel Craig exchanged a single look, the wordless communication of two people who have just shared a moment of social catastrophe and have simultaneously decided to pretend it never happened, and then went their separate ways. She told this story later, in public, with a kind of generous, self-deprecating honesty that is the signature of someone who has truly made peace with the fact that embarrassing things happen to them regularly and the only dignified response is to turn them into excellent material. There is a particular subcategory of Anne Hathaway comedy that deserves its own extended discussion, and that is her relationship with physical comedy. Specifically, her relationship with falling down. Now, falling is not inherently funny. Falling can be painful and humiliating and frightening, and in the wrong circumstances it is none of those things that anyone wants to experience or witness. But there is a very specific kind of fall, the fall that happens at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong place, with exactly the wrong audience watching, that transcends ordinary human misfortune and becomes something approaching performance art. Anne Hathaway has experienced this kind of fall with a frequency that suggests the universe has selected her as its preferred comedic collaborator. She has fallen on movie sets, which is perhaps understandable given the amount of physical action her roles have sometimes required. She has fallen on red carpets, which are notoriously treacherous surfaces when combined with high heels and the kind of gown that was designed by someone who has never actually tried to walk in it. She has fallen in the ordinary course of daily life, in situations where there is no reasonable explanation for why a fall should occur at all, except that it did, and she was there, and the cameras were somehow always nearby. What makes these moments genuinely funny rather than simply embarrassing is the way Anne Hathaway responds to them. She does not crumble. She does not disappear into mortification. She picks herself up, sometimes literally, looks directly at whoever is watching, and proceeds with exactly the kind of composure that suggests she planned the whole thing and it came out precisely as intended. It is a comic gift of the highest order, the ability to transform the moment of maximum vulnerability into the moment of maximum audience connection. The impressions, though, deserve more attention. Because while the Daniel Craig party story and the red carpet tumbles are wonderful windows into Anne Hathaway's personality, the impressions reveal something deeper about her actual talent. Doing an impression well requires a particular combination of skills that is genuinely rare. You need an ear precise enough to catch the specific frequencies and rhythms of another person's voice. You need a physical intelligence sophisticated enough to replicate not just how someone sounds but how they hold their body and move through space. And you need an emotional intuition sharp enough to understand what is actually funny about this particular person, not just what they sound like, but what they mean, what they project, what the gap is between what they intend to communicate and what they actually communicate. That gap is where the comedy lives. And Hathaway finds it every time. Her Britney Spears impression, which she performed on the Graham Norton show to an audience that was prepared for a charming conversation and instead received something closer to a full theatrical event, is a case study in exactly this kind of comedic precision. Britney Spears is one of the most impersonated celebrities in the world, which means that any impression of her runs the immediate risk of being generic, of simply deploying the familiar vocal markers and calling it a day. Hathaway did not take that approach. She found something specific, something that captured not just Spears' sound but her particular brand of effortful vulnerability, the quality that makes audiences simultaneously laugh and feel a strange rush of affection. The Graham Norton audience did not just recognize the impression. They were genuinely surprised and delighted by how good it was. That is the difference between a passable impression and a great one. And then there is Matthew McConaughey. If doing Britney Spears is difficult, doing Matthew McConaughey borders on the impossible. He is one of those performers whose entire presence is built around a quality that resists description. A kind of slow, sun-drenched philosophical ease that is simultaneously completely genuine and completely unlike anything you have encountered in another human being. His voice has a rhythm that is almost musical. His cadence creates a kind of gravitational field that pulls sentences in unexpected directions. To impersonate Matthew McConaughey convincingly, you cannot just sound like him. You have to think like him, at least for a few minutes. You have to inhabit the particular frequency at which he processes the world. On Jimmy Kimmel Live, Anne Hathaway announced that she was going to do her Matthew McConaughey impression. The audience settled in with a reasonable expectation of a decent vocal impression and a few well-chosen catchphrases. What they got instead was an experience. Hathaway constructed an entire story, a family road trip up the California coast, a 1960s hippie commune, a philosophy around incorporating citrus fruits into your meditation practice, and delivered it in McConaughey's voice and rhythm with such conviction and such commitment to the internal logic of the character that the audience was genuinely uncertain, for several long seconds, whether they were being told a true story or watching an impression. She had every element right: the slow, deliberate breath before each sentence, the way McConaughey's thoughts sometimes seem to arrive from a great philosophical distance, the specific mixture of warmth and mystery that makes his public persona so magnetic and so difficult to pin down. When she finally revealed that she had invented the entire story on the spot, the audience's laughter had that particular quality, slightly embarrassed, slightly awed, that only happens when someone has genuinely fooled you. She had not just done an impression of Matthew McConaughey. She had temporarily become him, and then revealed the trick, and the revelation was somehow even funnier than the performance. Working alongside funny people, it turns out, makes Anne Hathaway even funnier. This principle was demonstrated with exceptional clarity during the filming of Get Smart, the 2008 action comedy in which she starred opposite Steve Carell. Steve Carell is, by any reasonable assessment, one of the finest comedic actors of his generation. His ability to generate humor from pure character, from the specific way his face processes information, from the particular rhythm of his physical reactions, from his extraordinary gift for playing sincerity in absurd circumstances, is genuinely exceptional. When you put two performers of that caliber together in the same scene and ask them to be funny, the mathematical expectation is that they will be funny. What was not mathematically predictable was what actually happened, which was that they would make each other laugh so helplessly and so repeatedly that completing a single scene became something between a professional challenge and an extended comedic event in its own right. Footage from the Get Smart set shows Anne Hathaway and Steve Carell in a perpetual loop of corpsing, the technical term for when an actor breaks character by laughing during a scene that suggests neither of them was particularly committed to maintaining a straight face. One of them would begin a scene with every intention of completing it professionally. Then the other would do something, make a face, adjust a line reading by a fraction of a tone, add a tiny physical detail that was not in the script, and the whole enterprise would dissolve into laughter. Then they would compose themselves, start again, and the exact same thing would happen. The directors and crew, watching this unfold, faced the interesting challenge of capturing usable footage from two professionals who were technically doing their jobs while also technically being unable to stop laughing. The outtakes from this production are extraordinary. They are also, in a very real sense, a better argument for Anne Hathaway's comic credentials than any scripted performance could be, because they show her genuine instincts operating in real time, without any preparation, simply responding to another funny person and being funny back. There is a moment that illustrates something essential about Anne Hathaway's relationship with her own public image, and it involves a swimming pool, a set of paparazzi photographs, and a story that she had apparently been waiting for the right moment to tell. The photographs had been taken during a vacation, and from the outside they appeared to show Anne Hathaway in a state of some distress in the water, the kind of photographs that, without context, might suggest any number of dramatic or alarming interpretations. The tabloids, naturally, had leaned into these interpretations enthusiastically. The truth, as Anne Hathaway eventually explained in an interview, was both simpler and funnier than anything the tabloids had imagined. She had been swimming. She had gotten tired. She had reached a point where she was floating and trying to rest and essentially negotiating with her own body about whether continuing to swim was a viable option. Then she had concluded that it was not, in fact, a viable option, and had attempted to exit the water, and this process of exiting had been significantly more complicated and undignified than she had anticipated. The photographs had captured her at precisely the moment when she was realizing that she could not exit gracefully, that the photographers were there, that every subsequent action was being documented, and that the rational response, calmly walking out of the water as though nothing was happening, was physically beyond her in that specific moment. She told this story in full, with generous self-mockery and extraordinary physical comedy, recreating the facial expressions she had worn during each stage of the debacle, and the audience responded with the full-throated laughter of people who recognized in her story every moment they had ever been photographed at the worst possible second. The Devil Wears Prada is, by any measure, one of the most beloved films of the 2000s. It gave the world Miranda Priestley, Meryl Streep's magnificently chilling portrait of absolute creative power, and it gave the world Anne Hathaway's Andy Sachs, the young assistant navigating the treacherous waters of high fashion with a combination of sincerity and growing sophistication. 20 years after the film's release, it remains a cultural touchstone, endlessly quoted, endlessly analyzed, endlessly re-watched by people who find something new in it each time. Anne Hathaway has spent 20 years answering questions about this film, which you might expect to produce a certain weariness, a certain rehearsed quality to her responses. It has not. In a particularly memorable moment during a trivia game on the film, she was asked a question about her own role and confidently gave the wrong answer, attributing a famous scene to Emily Blunt rather than to herself. The realization that she had failed to remember her own performance in one of the most watched films of her career landed on her with the full force of comic irony, and she responded to it not with embarrassment but with the kind of genuine, full-bodied laughter that only happens when life has delivered a joke better than any writer could construct. It was a moment of perfect accidental comedy, and her willingness to share it publicly rather than quietly forget it happened said everything about who she is. What ultimately connects all of these moments, the impressions, the falls, the party stories, the swimming pool photographs, the trivia failures, is something that goes beyond mere comedic talent. It is a particular quality of courage. Comedy, real comedy, requires a willingness to look foolish. It requires the surrender of a certain amount of dignity, a certain amount of control, a certain amount of the carefully managed public persona that every person who operates in the public eye has spent enormous energy constructing. Most people, when they reach the level of success and acclaim that Anne Hathaway has reached, choose to protect their image rather than risk it. They become careful. They become calculated. They begin to manage every public moment with the precision of a brand protecting a trademark. Anne Hathaway has never done this. She has been willing, again and again, to be the person who does something unexpected and potentially embarrassing in front of an audience of millions. She has been willing to fall down. She has been willing to get the answer wrong. She has been willing to admit that she talked back to James Bond at a cocktail party and then discovered she was talking to the wrong person. She has been willing to do a full physical and vocal transformation into Matthew McConaughey on live television and then pull back the curtain and show you the trick. She has done all of this not despite her talent or her success, but as an expression of it, because she understands, at some fundamental level, that the audience does not want perfection. They want connection. They want the person on the screen or on the stage or in the interview chair to remind them, somehow, that we are all human and fallible and capable of extraordinary things and terrible embarrassments, sometimes in the same afternoon. Anne Hathaway has spent her career accumulating every kind of recognition that the entertainment industry offers. She has the Oscar. She has the Critics' Awards. She has the box office records and the iconic roles and the fashion magazine covers and all the other markers that define success in Hollywood by its conventional metrics. None of those things are what makes her truly remarkable. What makes her truly remarkable is the laughter. The laughter that she generates not from prepared material or professional technique alone, but from genuine human honesty, the willingness to show you who she actually is, in all of her surprising, unpredictable, wildly entertaining reality. When Anne Hathaway makes the whole world laugh, she is not performing. She is not executing a carefully planned comedic strategy. She is simply being herself, and trusting that herself is interesting enough, funny enough, real enough to hold the attention of anyone paying attention. And she is right. She has always been right. The world has been paying attention for decades, and the laughter has never stopped. It just keeps finding new forms, new stories, new impressions, new pratfalls, new moments of glorious, unexpected honesty, and every new form is another reminder that comedy, at its highest level, is not really about jokes at all. It is about